Students, today we will learn something about the determinants of age structure. If you want to learn determinants of age structure, you should also know what is an age structure is all about. Perhaps you should also know what is an age structure transition is all about. What do you mean by age sex structure transition? You should also learn what is actually, how do you measure an age structure transition if you really want to know what are its determinants, because to find out the determinants, you also know how actually to look at age structure transition, what is its stages, and all those aspects will be covered in the measurement aspect. And we will also look at some of the India's age structure transition stages and then move on to the determinants of age structure in our class. So, first let us look at what is age structure transition. As all of you know, we have already learned in the first lesson that age structure refers to the distribution of population in different ages. So, it is actually a depiction of the age of the entire population. So, how the population is divided into different age groups. So, age structure really constitutes an important part of the population change, because that determines the future population change. The future population changes means it is actually determined by the fertility, mortality and migration, which are all determined because of the population age structure. We have also already learned that this factor is so important and even encompasses several areas, like whether it is society's reproductive potential, whether it is manpower supply, whether it is development needs, whether it is migration history, whether it is mortality patterns, all those things are really affected by the age structure changes. So, naturally this is such a vital important indicator to understand. So, age that way portrays such an important aspects of the history, development process, as well as demographic and other patterns of the human population. So, let us talk about the determinants of age structure. What determines really the age structure? In demography, there are three major factors which determines an age structure. Firstly, it is fertility, or sometimes it is known as birth rate, but generally demographers hold it as fertility. Secondly, it is mortality. It is death rate or the experience of mortality in a population. And thirdly, it is a migration, the movement of people from one geographical region to another geographical region. So, these are the three major aspects of the determinants of demographic aspects of the determinants of age structure. So, in a way, the shape of age structure or the composition of age in any population will be determined solely by these three factors: fertility, mortality and migration. Conversely, you can also say that the age structure sets the future tone of population through its influence on affecting fertility, mortality and migration. In other words, the current age structure of the population determines what would be the approximate birth which will be happening in future, what would be the mortality pattern in the society, and even what would be the possible migration pattern in the society. How does it happen? Because the current age structure determines where the mortality will be concentrated. Suppose you have a large proportion of people living at the older ages, definitely your mortality rate will be higher. And if you have a very young adult population, your migration rate will be higher. So, naturally, this process influences the future fertility, mortality and migration as such. So, that way the fertility, mortality and migration influences age structure, that in turn influences the fertility, mortality and migration. Let us turn to the second aspect, which is one of the major important element which we study in age structure, which is known as age structure transition. Sometimes it is known as AST. AST means age structure transition. There has been an age structure transition in many countries and particularly in the developed countries. And age structure transition invariably follow because of the demographic transition. In some countries, age structure will be bottom heavy with large proportion of people in the younger age groups, and like in the developing countries, many developing countries because of the very high fertility in these places. But later with the demographic transition, it was transformed into a top heavy in the case of developed nation with larger proportion of people in the older ages. And as all of you know, the issues and concerns of age structure are different both for the national economic growth, development, and also for the varied other patterns, because each of these age structure influence the economy, the development, and culture and society differently. Let us now turn to the stages of age structure transition. Generally, it is found that there are three broad stages of the age structure transition, AST. The first one, the type 1, when actually mortality decline, particularly in the younger ages, resulting in very sharp increase in the younger age group population with high dependency ratio. In high fertility countries of Africa or even in some countries of Asia, it is found that nearly 45 to 55% of the population are children less than 15 years of age, and old age population, elderly population constitute only around 4 to 8% of the total population. So, it means they have a very heavy bottom heavy population pyramid, indicating that these are largely the first stage of age structure transition where the mortality transition has taken place, the fertilities remain relatively very high, naturally the large proportion of children are born and they also survive. That way you have a large proportion of people at the younger ages. But with the age structure transition, with the demographic transition, the age structure changes into the second stage of the transition, where fertility decline also start, resulting in the bulge in the working age group of the population, where the total dependency ratio will be the lowest in that place. And in recent years, it is found that many developing countries, even including India, are in the second stage of this transition. They have a larger proportion of people in the adult age group, the working age group, who can contribute to the labor market, who can contribute to the economy, who can actually help the country to grow faster, for the nation and the society to grow faster. So, that is the second stage of the transition. In the third stage, which is observed in many developed countries and Western countries, you would see that the proportion of children constitute less than 30% of the total population, but the proportion of elderly will be increasing and will be more than 15% of the population. So, meaning large proportion of people are moving towards the older ages and living in older ages, which is the third stage of transition, which we can perhaps say an inverted pyramid or inverted triangle, which will result in the larger proportion of people at the older ages. So, we have now learned what are the major stages of the transition, but how do you understand it? How do you measure it? So, let us also look at the major measurement tools available to understand the age structure changes. There are different ways of measuring age structure changes, and there are several measures which has been developed and which are quite useful, and each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. The first measure is to estimate age distribution of a population. Age distribution is simply the proportion or the percentage of population in a particular age group as against the total population. So, by looking at each age group population, the proportion of population in each age group, you will be able to make out whether actually the age distribution is in the first stage of the transition, or in the second stage of the transition, or in the third stage of the transition. So, this is very easy to compute, very easy to depict, and sometimes this is depicted through an age population pyramid, which we have already learned in the previous session. So, that will give you relatively good idea about how actually our age structure behaves in the society. The second measure is known as the median age. Median age of the population is where actually the population, the total population is divided into two groups numerically. The 50% of the population will be below and 50% of the population will be above. So, it is that age where actually half of the population will be below that age and half of the population will be above that age. So, if a country's median age is suppose 25 years of age, it means that 0 to 24 years of age population constitute 50% of that country's population, and the rest of the ages 25 and above constitute another 50% of the population. In a very high fertility countries, sometimes the median age can be as low as 20 or even 18 in some instance, but median age in a developed countries will be as high as 45 and 50 and so on. Thirdly, which we have already learned, the age structure can be depicted through what is known as dependency ratio. Dependency ratio can be computed for young dependency or for old dependency. The young dependency ratio, we divide the 0 to 14 population, which is the child population, divided by the working age group population, which is generally taken as 15 to 59 or 15 to 64, or you can compute old age dependency ratio. The old age dependency ratio is computed by dividing 60 plus or 65 plus population divided by the 15 to 60, 15 to 59 or 15 to 64 age group population, depending on which are the age group you consider as old age and which are the age group you consider as adults. You can also compute the total dependency ratio, which we have already learned in the previous class, which is dependency ratio of young plus older together divided by the adult age group population. Another measure to depict age structure, which is known as support ratio. The potential support ratio, which is generally known as PSR, is a reverse of the old age dependency ratio, that is 15 to 64 population divided by 65 and older population. So, this ratio describes the burden placed on the working population and by the non-working elderly population, or you can also include even children in the denominator, which also depicts how far actually the burden is depicted to the elderly as well as children on the working adult population. But we also know that all the age group in the 15 to 64, all the population in this 15 to 64 age group do not contribute to the labor market. It is possible that some of them are unemployed or underemployed. If that is the case, they may not be able to support the younger or elderly. So, sometimes the potential support ratio is computed as working age group population 25 to 59, that is who are working, divided by the 0 to 24 age group population and 60 plus population. And in that case, basically the working age group of population is given a weight of 0.9, indicating that there can be some number of people in the 0 to 24 working, and it is also possible that some of the people who are in the 25 to 59 age group who are also unemployed. Now, let us turn back to what is happening in India. What is India's age structure? Many of you know India is now characterized by an young country. Young country meaning that larger proportion of India's population now are in the younger age group, means in the adult age group. So, the child population India is declining and the adult population India is increasing. This is because of the decline in the birth rate of India for the last several decades. Because of that, the development planning process has to take into consideration the age structure for the policy and planning in India, because there is a transition happening in India from younger age group population to adult age group population. Look at the table. If you look at the age structure in India in 1950, 2015, and if you project it for the 2050, you would see some interesting pattern. One, look at a single measure, median age. In 50, 21.3 was median age. It means 50% of the population was below age 21.3 and 50% of the population's age was above 21.3, which will be increased to 33 in the age 2050. So, it indicates that we have a transition happening in the age structure. Look at the younger age group population 0 to 14, 0 to 4. There were around 14% of the population in the 0 to 4 in 1950, which has declined to 9.44% in 2015 and 8.05 in 2050. But at the same time, you would also see an increase in the proportion of population in the adult ages. So, and there is also a rapid increase in the population in the older ages, which signifies the transition which is currently underway in India in the age structure because of the demographic processes. So, AST definitely is in the process in India, and there is a movement from young cohort to the adult and old cohorts of shifting of the population, and the proportion of the people are undergoing a transition from one age to the other age at the aggregate level because of the fertility transition, mortality transition which is taking place in the country. Recently, there has been large debate on the implications of age structure on the economy, because each age structure has its own ripples in the economy and the society. This is generally known as demographic gift of demographic bonus or demographic dividend. In other words, it has been told that there is a window of opportunity for every country when there is an age structure transition from first stage of the transition to the second stage of the transition, when there are large proportion of people are in the adult ages. So, this period is expected to be suitable for an economic takeoff, provided that there are other factors favorable in the country or the nation. Other factors meaning there should be political stability, there should be adequate saving and investment, there should be adequate human capital and knowledge economy, required development skills. These are all integral part of any development process, which if they are all conducive, the large proportion of working age group population resulting in demographic dividend can be a boom for the country in economic terms. Look at India's demographic dividend potential. See, with the fertility transition happening in India, the proportion of people in the younger ages is declining since about, you may say, after 70s. So, but this transition is also for a shorter period. This will not last long, because in the third stage of the transition, the population growth will be higher in the older ages than at the adult ages. So, this is a shorter period starting from end of 70s in India and perhaps culminate by in the 20s or 30s. After that, the 0 to 14 population in the country might be constant in proportion wise. The adult population might start slowly declining, but the old age population might start increasing in the country. Now, let us turn back to the determinants of age structure. We have already learned that there are three critical factors which determines age structure. The fertility shows what will be the shape of the age structure in a particular place. We will take one by one. First, let us look at the fertility. It determines the proportion of population in the newborn categories. That is, the fertility of birth rate tells you how many people are born in a country in a particular time point. In poor countries, the longevity of life expectancy is short. Because of that, the proportion of population in the older ages will not be very high. So, naturally, in such situation, age structure is mainly determined by the fertility rate. So, the proportion of people in the younger ages declines with the fertility transition. As they move to the older adult ages, there will be a second stage of the transition, and later it will be the old age transition. So, naturally, the fertility is the major reason for the age structure transition. As the fertility transition takes place, age structure invariably changes. First, there will be a reduction in the younger age group, as we told, and second, there will be a bulge in the adult age group, and then later a transition from adult to older ages. So, that way fertility is one of the critical component of the age structure of any population. So, if you have to understand the age structure transition, naturally one has to look at the fertility behavior of current as well as the past fertility behavior. That is a critical important indicator to understand the age structure. Secondly, the mortality can affect age structure very significantly in many contexts. Age structure definitely affected by the mortality, because the survival of childhood improves, the proportion of children will tend to rise, and that of older ages will tend to fall. So, naturally, with the survival of the children increases, infant mortality declines, child mortality declines. Naturally, more and more children will be surviving to adult ages and later to the older ages. And if survival rate improves, takes place among older people, the proportion of older people will improve and the children will tend to fall. So, naturally, if the life expectancy of the older people goes up, there will be larger proportion of people surviving in the older ages. So, that also will shape the age structure of the population. Similarly, the mortality is low both among younger and older age groups. In case like developed countries, the share of working age population will be larger and the dependency ratio will be lower as well. But mortality can affect age structure to a variety of other ways, because in case there is a war, there can be a larger proportion of adult dying because of the war. if there is a catastrophe, there can be a significant proportion of particular age group population can be affected by that catastrophe. Natural calamities are many often affected, and many children are died in natural calamities. And when there are epidemics, many epidemics are also age related epidemics. So, all these things can also affect the age structure of the population, whether it is war, whether it is catastrophes, whether it is accidents, whether it is natural calamities, whether it is epidemics, all have some impact on the age structure because of the mortality. There are also violence form of deaths which creates changes in the age structure depending on its impact on different sections of the population. So, that way the mortality has also sometimes very peculiar, can also create a very peculiar nature of the age structure because of its impact on the nature of the impact it makes on different sections of the population. Finally, thirdly, the third important factor, as all of us know, is the migration. Migration has a direct bearing on the age structure of the population depending on the in-migration and out-migration, or immigrants and emigrants if you are considering a country. Those who migrate generally belongs to the relatively younger age group, and those who migrate are also population of a particular sex. So, that way age and sex structure is invariably determined also by the migration. In some countries of the world, migration plays a very particular role in shaping the age structure of the population. As you know, when the youth migrate, the proportion of older adults and aged population start declining. So, naturally, when there is large scale immigrants or immigrants to a particular country from the younger age group, the proportion of that age group will go up and the proportion of older age group will come down. And the impact of migration on age structure is largely because of the fact that migration tends to be age selective. So, we have now learned different aspects of the age structure transition and the major determinants of age structure in this lesson. We have learned that three important factors determines age structure, which is fertility, which is mortality, and which is migration. And age structure transition also has three stages, one with high fertility and mortality, the second stage with lower fertility and bulging adult age group population, and finally moving the age structure towards the older age with larger proportion of elderly population. And age structure is determined by three important factors, and three important factors can play varieties of ways can influence the age structure. Fertility undoubtedly is the most important factor. Mortality many times can play a very important role to many other factors like war, catastrophe, epidemics, and so on. And migration invariably also plays a vital important role. So, understand that an age structure is very important for the society, understanding society, economy, culture, politics of a nation, of a society, and that age structure is determined by three vital demographic factors: fertility, mortality, and migration. Thank you.